The Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing will survey the current and future operations of Amtrak. Amtrak is federally chartered, owned by the federal government, and governed by a board of directors appointed by the president and subject to Senate confirmation. As a generous recipient of taxpayer dollars to operate its system, Amtrak should focus on maintaining and improving its current services to increase revenue and achieve profitability. Instead, Amtrak seems content to lose roughly $1 billion per year by its own predictions, and flush with historic funding from the IJA, is choosing to pursue costly and highly questionable acquisitions and route expansions that may not serve the best interests of the American commuter. Amtrak ridership collapsed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ridership has since rebounded as of March of 2024, yet much remains to be done to improve service and attract riders. Today's hearing will provide an opportunity to continue this subcommittee's examination of the challenges that are in the way of potential improvements. For instance, in 2016, Amtrak received almost $2.5 billion in federal loans to procure new Acela train sets. However, as of today, no train sets have been entered into service. This is primarily because Amtrak approved the manufacture of new train sets before the completion of required safety modeling that ensures the trains are safe to run on the Northeast Corridor track. As such, these train sets are 3 years behind schedule and tens of millions of dollars over budget. We also remain concerned about the lack of improvements in transparency and accountability at Amtrak following the record levels of funding it has received in recent years. The Amtrak Board of Directors does not make its meetings open to the public as other federally chartered entities do, and the board has approved substantial performance bonuses, payments to Amtrak executives despite significant financial losses. Doesn't seem right. As the Committee of Jurisdiction over Amtrak, we will continue to monitor these critical issues and conduct oversight to ensure that taxpayer funding is used in the most effective manner to improve service and get Amtrak back on the road to profitability. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today, and I do look forward to our discussion. I now recognize Ranking Member of the Subcommittee, Ms. Frederick Wilson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Niels, and thank you to our witnesses today. Welcome to all of you. Amtrak is our nation's inner-city passenger rail service, and as a Floridian, I'm proud of both Amtrak's routes and Brightline services, which now connect Miami and Orlando. Amtrak and Brightline operates on tracks that my great-grandfather built when he first immigrated to this country from the Bahamas. Amtrak allowed me to ride my first overnight train trip to New York City as a little girl. 2 Amtrak trains per day run through my district, and we have a maintenance facility in nearby Hialeah. Brightline and Amtrak are essential services in our community, but unfortunately, we have endured too many grade crossing deaths. 2 weeks ago, a vehicle was struck on the rail in Opelika, in the heart of my district. Luckily, no one was hurt this time, but this is just one of the countless incidents of rail car collision. While I understand some of these incidents are outside Brightline and Amtrak's control, at a certain point, with so many incidents, we must ask, at one point, it becomes our joint responsibility to address this crisis. When do we do that? For the 3 years before the Bright Line launch, I discussed safety along the railroad line because safety remains my top priority for the work on this subcommittee. Alongside safety, expanding rail to all Americans and connecting the diverse parts of America through rail remains a priority for me. As one of the 5 original co-sponsors of the bipartisan infrastructure law, I'm proud that this law is ushering in an era of unprecedented investments in rail. We're seeing this funding being channeled into substantial safety improvements to the Bright Line route in Dania Beach, Wilton Manors, Fort Lauderdale, Hallandale Beach, Hollywood, Pompano Beach, and West Palm Beach. In our effort to expand rail, the Corridor ID program identified 69 corridors in 44 states, guiding passenger rail expansion across the country. I'm glad to see that 2 of those corridors are in my home state of Florida, and more specifically in my community, the Miami-Orlando-Tampa corridor and the Jacksonville-Orlando-Miami corridor. Late last year, the Federal Railroad Administration awarded $8.2 billion across 10 projects in 9 states to improve and expand passenger rail service. This includes extending and improving the Piedmont Corridor in North Carolina, which will improve connections with the busy Northeast Corridor. Ms. White, I'm sure you will be able to tell us more about just how your state has been able to make this historic investment in passenger rail. Beyond the benefits to rail passengers, the bipartisan infrastructure law investments are revolutionizing the railway supply chain. Siemens is investing in a new North Carolina facility that will build new Amtrak train sets and provide maintenance for rail cars and locomotives for years to come. This facility will add 500 jobs and over $1.6 billion to local economy, all thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law. Through recent rail investments, we also have been able to better support our future rail workers. Last September, the Federal Railroad Administration awarded the University of South Florida a $17 million grant to work with universities nationwide to boost the railroad workforce. These are just some of the many improvements we've recently made in rail space. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the impact the bipartisan infrastructure law has made on passenger rail and what they would like to see in the next infrastructure law. All aboard. Mr. Chair, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson, and I appreciate your comments on rail crossings, grade crossings, and the dangers that we see across our country, probably on a weekly basis here, and I think we as a committee should address those. Agree with you wholeheartedly. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Wilson, for holding today's hearing on improving Amtrak and intercity passenger rail across the country. Before I begin, I want to welcome Representative Chris DeLuzio as a member of this subcommittee, as well as a member of the Subcommittee on Aviation. Representative DeLuzio joins this committee with a record of fighting to strengthen transportation safety and support workers. I look forward to your partnership on rail safety and other initiatives to make America's infrastructure cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible. Turning to today's hearing, the bipartisan infrastructure law was a monumental achievement that supercharged our nation's investment in rail with more than $100 billion in funding. The BIL provided bold, long-term investments in transportation systems and infrastructure. These investments are creating jobs and benefiting the economy. For intercity passenger rail, the BIL guaranteed multi-year funding for capital investments and development. It made possible, for the first time ever, dedicated, reliable federal funding dispersed over 5 years to improve and expand intercity passenger rail. Since our hearing last year, the FRA has announced $26.6 billion in BIL grants for 237 projects. This includes 69 corridors in 44 states, including the District of Columbia, that were all recipients of Corridor ID grants. In my state of Washington, the Washington State Department of Transportation received grants for 2 corridors. The Cascadia Ultra High-Speed Ground Transportation Project that will provide a new alignment for high-speed rail service between Vancouver, Canada, and Portland, Oregon via Seattle, and the current state-supported Amtrak Cascades route that serves Bellingham, Mount Vernon, Stanwood, Everett, and Edmonds in my district. The BIL is also an investment in our workforce. The funding is being used to grow a well-trained, diverse workforce to build, operate, and maintain a national intercity passenger rail network. Amtrak has hired an additional 8,500 people in the last 2 years, and the BIL is funding university-led, Amtrak-led, and union-led workforce development initiatives. Great results already here as we hit the halfway mark of the BIL, and more is still to come from additional rail funding to be announced. Now, while the final appropriations bill for fiscal year 2024 did not include all the rail funding authorized in BIL, it did demonstrate bipartisan support for these investments. I look forward to hearing today from witnesses about the impact of budget certainty and how this will ultimately improve service for rail passengers. As we did in fighting for rail funding in the BIL, this committee is dedicated to helping communities get regular and reliable passenger rail service. And of the $100 billion provided for rail in the BIL, $66 billion was provided in the form of advance appropriations. The remaining $34 billion is subject to appropriations and therefore not guaranteed. So I'll continue to push for Congress to fully fund its intercity passenger rail commitments to create jobs, grow regional economies, reduce congestion and carbon emissions, and build a cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible transportation network. This transformational investment in the BIL is a great start, but Congress needs to build on this by securing regular, reliable funding for intercity passenger rail. Thanks to BIL, for the first time since the founding of Amtrak over 50 years ago, states and cities have the certainty of knowing that funding for passenger rail projects will be there. Highways, transit, airports, and harbors all have funding certainty to some extent, enabling long-term major capital projects in these modes without fluctuations due to the annual appropriations process. It's time that intercity passenger rail had the same certainty. The demand exists. Last year, FRA received over $18 billion in applications for $8.9 billion in available funds, and the Corridor ID program received over 90 applications from communities that want to add or improve intercity passenger rail connections. So today we're going to hear from witnesses who are turning these historic investments into tangible improvements. I want to thank each of the witnesses for joining the committee today to provide their vision and recommendations for the future of passenger rail. And with that, I yield back.
Ranking Member Larson yields. I would like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Briefly, I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system to our witnesses. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow, you're running out, and red, conclude your marks. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included into the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Gardner, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Wilson, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Stephen Gardner, Amtrak CEO, and thank you for inviting me today. It's my pleasure to share this table with our chairman, Tony Kosha, and our great partner, Deputy Secretary White of North Carolina. Amtrak has accomplished a great deal during FY24. Our ridership and revenue are up over 20% and 10% respectively, and May was our best revenue month ever in the history of the company. We're on track to set a new record ridership this year and will further reduce our operating losses. We've expanded service with our state partners, and on the Northeast Corridor, we've added frequencies to meet demand. Thanks to the funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, construction is now underway or starting soon on truly massive projects that we've been discussing for decades, like the Hudson and Frederick Douglass Tunnel projects, the Portal North, Connecticut, and Susquehanna River bridges, and redevelopment of our stations in Chicago and Philadelphia. We are also acquiring new equipment that will transform the travel experience. Our new Acela trains are in testing now and could enter service around the end of this year. Our new Amtrak Arrows for regional service in the Northeast and state-supported routes are arriving in 2026, and we are out to bid right now for a new fleet of long-distance trains. To make all this happen, Amtrak is undergoing a dramatic transformation. We are not the company we were a few years ago. We have rebuilt and expanded our workforce with some of the best in the business. We've enhanced safety and security thanks to technologies like positive train control and the hard work of the Amtrak Police Department and our cybersecurity team. We've improved overall on-time performance, become more efficient in producing capacity from our limited fleet, and improved accessibility for passengers with disabilities. Finally, we've continued upgrading our customer experience with refreshed equipment, improved customer communications, expanded dining options, better trained employees, and there's lots more to come. Driving all of this is our ambitious goal of doubling ridership by 2040. As our nation's population grows, we believe passenger rail can and must play a bigger role. This goal underlies these investments, our partnerships with states like North Carolina and the Federal Railroad Administration, and our evaluation of potential public-private partnerships like the Texas Central High-Speed Rail Project. Increasing Amtrak ridership is so important because more Amtrak passengers mean less congestion on already overcrowded highways and less need to turn existing interstates into monster highways, 10 lanes or more. For instance, we all know how bad traffic is here to the south on I-95. Imagine how much worse it would be if the over 1.3 million passengers who rode state-supported Amtrak service along I-95 in Virginia last year had to drive. To grow, we will need to both improve existing service and expand service in states and corridors that we don't serve well or even at all today. Our current route map largely reflects an America of 70 years ago. That's why Texas, now our second most populous state, has only 5 Amtrak trains a day. And Florida, our third most populous state, only has 6, compared to the small but mighty Rhode Island, which has 38 trains per day. Building enhanced partnerships with our state, commuter, and host railroad partners is key to this growth. Thankfully, IIJA funding has encouraged states and others to invest in intercity passenger rail and created new opportunities for win-win projects with our freight and commuter partners, where we can improve safety, reliability, and capacity together for all users. In fact, much of the rail funding in the IIJA is not going to Amtrak. Nearly 3/4 of the FRA's national network grants have gone to California High-Speed Rail and Brightline West projects, and 2/3 of the CRISI funds awarded last year went to shortline and regional railroads. Amtrak supports these investments because they will grow and improve the whole system, while we use our supplemental funding to address decades' worth of underinvestment in fleet, stations, infrastructure, and systems. It's critical to remember, however, that Amtrak's IIJA supplemental funds don't cover basic operations and maintenance. It's essential that we continue to receive adequate annual appropriations to maintain our assets and continue serving your communities. Likewise, while the reauthorization of IIJA is still a couple of years away, I want to state now how important it is that Congress continue to provide dedicated multi-year funding for rail. Without guaranteed funding provided by the IIJA, we simply couldn't make the progress we are accomplishing today. Sustained funding will allow intercity passenger rail to at last fulfill its potential to alleviate congestion, enhance mobility, and spur economic development throughout the nation. I'm thrilled to be part of this extraordinary time in Amtrak's history. I thank the members of this subcommittee, Mr. Chairman, for their support and for support of passenger rail. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. I see you have a robust team here. I want to recognize Chief Dotson. It's good to see you again. We spent some time up in Milwaukee a month or two ago, and I just thank you for being here. I now recognize Mr. Kosha for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Wilson, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the committee. I am Tony Kosha, the Chairman of Amtrak's Board of Directors, on which I have served since 2010 and chaired since 2013. While I'm grateful for your invitation to speak to you today, it does sadden me not to see Congressman Donald Payne, a great member from the congressional district adjoining mine and also a very good friend of mine. Amtrak's come a long way since 2010. We serve many more passengers, have become more efficient, and we're very mindful of our statutory directive to operate as a business while fulfilling our public service mission. The role of Amtrak's board is to set corporate policy and oversee Amtrak's management. We represent interests of the Amtrak stakeholders, who include the federal taxpayers, customers, employees, and state partners. I hope we soon will have a full complement of board members to bring greater geographic diversity and additional perspectives and expertise. The board has played an active role in the implementation of measures that have materially improved Amtrak's financial reporting, accountability, and transparency. Amtrak has adopted expanded internal audit and compliance programs and an enterprise risk management system, new project controls, estimating functions, and at the board's direction, we've enhanced our collaboration with Amtrak's Office of Inspector General. We now hold board sessions each year with the general public, labor unions representing our employees, the disability community, and other stakeholders, and we will begin next month holding meetings with our state partners. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA funding, for which we are very grateful, will allow Amtrak to make major capital investments, grow ridership, enhance safety, and build partnerships and increase our value throughout the nation. The IIJA has made accountability and transparency and the board's oversight responsibilities even more important. I believe that Amtrak and its board are well prepared to assume the additional responsibilities the IIJA has given us. One of the board's responsibilities is to set management compensation policies. I know there have been questions raised about Amtrak's management incentive compensation program. That program, which bases a portion of managers' compensation on performance, was initiated in 2013 in response to a statutory recommendation and in conjunction with terminating Amtrak's very costly management, pension, and post-retirement benefit programs, which paid benefits regardless of Amtrak's performance. The management incentive program allowed the company to attract a stronger management team that significantly improved financial performance prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. As Amtrak emerged from the first year of the pandemic, during which we suspended our incentive program and imposed management salary cuts of up to 20%, the incentive program allowed us to rebuild our workforce and attract new employees with the expertise we needed. It bears noting that even with the potential management incentive payments, Amtrak employees, particularly those at the senior level, generally earn much less than their counterparts in the freight railroad and other industries with which Amtrak competes for talent. That said, I am aware of the bills that were introduced yesterday regarding transparency around executive compensation. The board supports releasing the details of our pay for performance plan, including the awards to executives, as we have done in the past. That information will be posted on Amtrak's website this week. If Amtrak didn't have the workforce required to manage and support multiple multi-billion-dollar capital projects, it would have to rely on high-priced consultants to do that for us. Having chaired the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey while we were rebuilding Lower Manhattan after 9/11, I can attest that relying on consultants would be much more costly and would greatly increase project risks, as the experience of rail and transit projects overly dependent on consultants has demonstrated. Those of us who live in the Northeast Corridor are very fortunate. Because of federal investment, someone traveling from Washington to northern New Jersey, where I live, doesn't have to spend hours in traffic along I-95 or make their way to the airport to line up for security and sit in long queues of planes awaiting for takeoff. Instead, I can hop on a train at Union Station, work without interruption, and in less than 3 hours be dropped off 200 miles away near my home. I believe that those who live in other parts of the United States should have that same benefit. When Congress reauthorizes surface transportation, I hope you will decide that intercity passenger rail service should be an important travel mode throughout the United States and will provide the resources to allow Amtrak and our partners to make that vision a reality. Thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kosha. I'd like to now recognize Ms. Foshi to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our witnesses here today from my home state, the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation, Julie White. It is great to see you again, Ms. White. There have been a number of exciting developments and investments of late in North Carolina's passenger rail systems, so I think it's very timely to have you here before this committee today. I look forward to hearing more about the work that the North Carolina Department of Transportation is doing to make rail travel more affordable and accessible for the folks back home, and how they are partnering with Amtrak to do so. It is also my sincere hope that this might prove to be an opportunity for others to learn from the great strides we in the Tar Heel State are making in passenger rail. My colleagues and I on this committee are so thankful that you're here and a part of this hearing today, Deputy Secretary, and we greatly look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. White, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Wilson, Ranking Member Larson, and all the members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing to discuss passenger rail as an integral part of our national transportation system. As the Congresswoman said, my name is Julie White, and I'm the Deputy Secretary for Multimodal Transportation at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, where I oversee our rail, aviation, ferry, public transit, bicycle, and pedestrian divisions. I also chair the Southeast Corridor Commission, a regional rail partnership whose cooperation is advancing our shared vision for high-performance rail throughout the Southeast megaregion. I want to thank Congress for its support of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has significantly advanced our rail investments. North Carolina has received several CRISI grants, a $1 billion federal-state partnership construction grant, and short-line grants supporting economic development in rural western and central North Carolina. We are grateful for the bipartisan support we have received for our federal competitive grant applications from both state elected leaders and our congressional delegation. Rail is the only mode that does not enjoy formulaic federal funding, meaning projects often languish on shelves awaiting the right competitive federal grant opportunity, resulting in decades-long waits for new service and expired environmental documents. The bipartisan infrastructure law offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to demonstrate how your substantial investment can change this trajectory and set a different course for the future. Passenger ridership in North Carolina is at an all-time high, with 2023 state-supported service ridership 38% higher than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. We continue to see an upward trajectory with a 24% higher volume in the first quarter of 24 as compared to 2023. Tomorrow, our Open Express train will depart Raleigh Union Station to travel for the first time all the way to Pinehurst, North Carolina, bringing attendees to the United States Gulf Association's U.S. Open. We have sold out all 4 train trips, further demonstrating the unmet demand for service to new destinations in our state. Communities in North Carolina actively sought the submission of 12 existing rail corridors to the Federal Rail Administration's Corridor Identification Development Pipeline Program, and we are pleased to share that North Carolina received a record 7 corridors into the program. We can now provide local governments strong estimates of how much non-federal match will be needed to advance the corridors, allowing them to budget accordingly. Predictable pathways allow local communities to better communicate plans to citizens and galvanize and maintain the support needed to lift such large-scale, decades-long projects. With consistent, robust, reliable, and sufficient federal rail funding and non-federal match, we could potentially see service across our state from Asheville to Wilmington by 2035. The NCDOT has developed a highly successful partnership with small and rural communities to advance multimodal projects. The NCDOT contributes our technical expertise, we develop the federal grant applications and administer the federal funds, while the local community works with consultants to design their rail and transit future and provides the needed non-federal matching funds. Through these partnerships, we have jointly secured transit-oriented development planning grants and the funding to advance rail station mobility hubs through feasibility study, NEPA documentation, and preliminary design. The Raleigh to Richmond project along the S-Line is a key initiative reducing travel time between Raleigh and Richmond by an hour and providing a car-competitive trip between Raleigh and Washington, D.C. At full build-out, we estimate our annual ridership will climb to 2.5 million riders. We anticipate our first groundbreaking this summer and will apply for future grants to continue construction north. As we all know, planning and building infrastructure takes too long. Through regular, reliable rail funding formulas, we could significantly shorten the time it takes to put the investment in the ground, as we would be able to program projects earlier and reduce the need for the months-long agreements phase. NCDOT has a strong history of obligating and spending billions of federal dollars through formula programs, as do many other states. Streamlining the discretionary process to enable similar approvals would be beneficial to all stakeholders. The Southeast Corridor Commission and the state of North Carolina remain committed to partnering with Congress, our freight rail partners, Amtrak, the FRA, and others to expand freight and passenger rail in the Southeast. Continued strong investment in rail in the next reauthorization will enable us to continue to meet the transportation needs of North Carolinians in all parts of our state, assist communities in growing their economic vitality, and provide more opportunities for the next generation to remain in the communities they grew up in. Thank you for the opportunity to address the subcommittee.
Thank you, Ms. White, and thank you all for your testimony. We will now turn to questions for the panel, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Garner, again, thank you for being here. My question is related to the government in the Sunshine Act, or Sunshine Act, which was created to promote and improve transparency and decision-making in the government. Under this law, agency meetings must generally be open to the public. Makes sense. The Supreme Court recognized Amtrak's federal status and found in DOT versus American Association of Railroads that Amtrak was created by the government, is controlled by the government, and operates for the government's benefit. Given Amtrak's federal status, why has Amtrak continued to violate the Sunshine Act?
Thank you, Chairman Nels. I believe that Amtrak in the 90s, through a series of work with our council and others, determined that the Sunshine Act itself didn't apply to Amtrak at that time. As you've said, we are certainly an entity owned by the federal government, but we're a corporation established under the DC Corporate Act. So we certainly could get back to you on the specifics there about the application of that statute. Certainly, as the chairman said, we intend and we have been following the recent changes in the IIJA to engage the public and have more public input with the board meetings.
Just getting you, to commit to, implementing some measures that will bring you into compliance with it is what we're asking. It's just get into compliance with the Sunshine Act. I don't think it's that difficult to do.
Okay, well, we certainly can look at that again. I think that the issue applies to the governance of the company. We can take that.
Everything's about transparency. We know that, how important it is. So, Mr. Kosha, how would that transparency measures required under the Sunshine Act improve the operation of Amtrak's board of directors, and will you commit to complying with federal requirements for your board meetings?
Well, without adding to the sort of need to analyze it from a legal standpoint, which Mr. Gardner has committed to doing, and my recollection of the application of the Sunshine Law at Amtrak is in line with what Mr. Gardner just mentioned. But on a more important point, the board feels as though the level of request for transparency as to the board's deliberations and the operations of the company is actually a very, very positive thing. We embrace it. We very much welcome the opportunity, as we now have in the last year, to have several meetings in the public. Our meeting in Richmond was very well attended by the general public. Meetings we've had with the disability community, with our labor unions, all of them have been in the context of a board session, including those constituent groups. And as I mentioned during my testimony, we're doing that with the states beginning next month. In addition to that, myself and several of our board members have made a point of engaging different stakeholder groups that are very engaged with Amtrak on an individual level in order to be able to hear more of their concerns. I've had conversations within the past day and with the RPA, which represents the largest group of our passengers, and we've discussed a number of initiatives that we can do jointly to create a greater level of interaction between our stakeholder community, our board, and the company generally. And and the RPA can certainly speak for themselves, but I think they're very supportive of that effort.
I would like to hear from Ms. White on this from a state's perspective about just being more open, transparent, Amtrak's decision-making.
We were appreciative of being included in the board meeting in Richmond in December and appreciated the opportunity to share our story there. Transparency is foundational in the state of North Carolina, so we support what Amtrak is doing to become more transparent.
Yeah. Last one for Mr. Gardner here. 2016, Amtrak awarded the $2.45 billion federal loan to procure these train sets for the Acela, which was on last month, by the way, so I hope contribute to your record month, right? May 2024, the most revenue. Is that what it was? Well, I'm part of that. However, to date, these train sets are still not in service. According to reports from Amtrak OIG, these train sets were produced and manufacturers before they could verify that they were safe to run on the Northeast Corridor. So I don't know why Amtrak agrees to build train sets before getting the safety model validated and approved by the FRA. I think you kind of mentioned it in your opening, but when can we expect the new Acela train sets to enter into service?
Well, thank you, Chairman Nels. So you're right that we have been working with Alstom, the manufacturer, for quite a while here on these trains, and they are in test right now. Our hope is that by the end of the year, they could be in service around that period. That will depend on the testing work. But I would say that when we went out to bid for these trains, there of course, is not a domestic high-speed rail industry here at the time. We had a competitive procurement, and we went through a brand-new regulatory process established by the FRA, which had required trains to be built, prototype trains to be built, and additional trains to be made, and then tested both in dynamic test and using simulation and model. So that is underway and is following all the requirements of the FRA. It's really Alstom's job to finish this testing and get the train certified. We're anxious, of course, to have that happen because, as you say, the ridership is going well, and we wish we had more trains available today. We are working hard to make that happen and hold our partners accountable in the process.
Thank you. I yield back. I now recognize Ms. Wilson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Ms. White. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials and the States for Passenger Rail Coalition recently sent a joint letter to our appropriations colleagues in support of the President's recommendation to set aside funds from the CRISI program for state rail planning efforts, since there is no dedicated federal funding source for rail planning. Ms. White, do you support this effort?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are members of AASHTO, and we do support the position.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to add that letter.
Without objection.
Ms. White, what is North Carolina doing to reduce grade crossing incidents between cars and pedestrians with passenger and freight trains?
Our rail division has responsibility for safety as part of our portfolio, so we have a number of programs aimed at reducing vehicle and train and pedestrian conflicts. Our S-Line corridor that we're developing from Raleigh North is actually going to be a sealed corridor. It's a concept that we pioneered some years ago, where the entire corridor will be grade separated. And so that is one example of what we're doing. We have an active program to close grade crossings throughout the state, and we help fund those programs as well. We have a Be Rail Safe program where we do education to try and encourage people not to trespass and be where the tracks are. So we have a very active safety portfolio in our rail division.
Okay, thank you. This is for Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner, what can you tell me about when Amtrak will be able to serve the Miami Intermodal Center at Miami Airport?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The Miami International Airport Intermodal Center at the airport has been a project long underway, and it involves us transitioning from our Hialeah facility to that facility. We're in active conversations with FDOT and also the Miami-Dade Airport Authority and Tri-Rail, who are responsible for both the infrastructure and the station. We've been in negotiations for a while to try and establish the right terms of access. Amtrak has access as a matter of statute to the facility, so we're in negotiations presently with FDOT to try and come up with a deal that works for all parties here and allows Amtrak to move over so we can terminate our trains at that facility. It's important that we have an efficient facility there that can continue to serve passengers well. We think the connections intermodally are great, but we remain in negotiations with FDOT so we can get the right deal for Amtrak in terms of its tenancy.
Thank you. Ms. White, North Carolina received one of the Federal State Partnership for Intercity Rail National Grants for the Raleigh-Richmond Center. Why did you choose this corridor to submit to the program?
Congresswoman, I want to be sure I understood the question. Did you say the submission for the Federal State Partnership Grant or for the Corridor ID program? Federal State Partnership Grant. When the competitive grant opportunities open up, we analyze them as compared to the projects that we have in our pipeline to determine which we think will be the most competitive and which we have a match for. For the S-Line, we use grade separations in our State Transportation Improvement Program as match to the federal funds. So we had a number of those grade separations already programmed in our State Transportation Improvement Program. Additionally, we felt with the benefit cost analysis that it would be a highly competitive project. We're doing it in partnership with the state of Virginia and with Amtrak, and we know that advancing projects in the Southeast Corridor is important to the Federal Rail Administration, so we felt it would be a highly competitive project. Additionally, we have an incredible amount of groundswell of support from the communities along the S-Line. When we first started thinking about bringing passenger rail back to the S-Line, we went and met with each community along the line and asked them if that was something that would interest them. It runs through the main street of many towns in the Triangle area, and each of them had said that that was a goal for their community to bring passenger rail back. So that was part of our process in determining that that was our best project to put forward.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. First question is really for Mr. Kosha, and congratulations on your recent reconfirmation. I've heard some concerns that Amtrak's board is overly focused on the Northeast Corridor, with apologies to my friends on the Northeast Corridor, at the expense of the national network. Can you characterize the Amtrak board's view on long-distance trains and getting a long-distance network?
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. And I actually welcome the opportunity to speak about this, which I often do, because given the fact that I'm actually from the Northeast Corridor and have had a career there, that there's an assumption made about my position on the subject, as well as several of my fellow board members. And I think I can say, I'd like to say without any equivocation whatsoever, that I and our board are very, very much committed to the national network. And in fact, we've made many decisions during the course of our board's work together to make significant investments in acquiring additional equipment and upgrading state of good repair. And we've recently, as I think was mentioned, issued an RFP to completely replace the fleet on the long distance corridor. But I think far more fundamental to it is that our view and our hope for Amtrak's future is to build a national network that uses our existing long-distance system as essentially the spine upon which we build that. We see that as the anchor that gives us the ability to serve many communities throughout the country that don't have service today. And we also are very much aware of the fact that the communities that we serve in the national network, in many respects, we are their only form of transportation. There isn't an airport that can be easily utilized. The bus systems have abandoned them a long time ago. And many of our travelers don't have access to an automobile as well. So we know that from an economic driver standpoint and from a mobility standpoint, our work in those communities is absolutely fundamental. So we are, as a board, 100% committed to the maintenance of our national network and, frankly, the expansion of it. And I think we put our resources behind that kind of initiative and expect to continue to do so.
Thank you. Deputy Secretary White, what lessons can other states take from your work to develop support for passenger rail? Do you have a top 3 for us to consider?
Top three. Well, let's start with that local community support. We really start with a approach of a partnership. If it is not a goal of a community and they aren't willing to do a match, then we're going to work with the different communities. Skin in the game, I would say, is number two. All of these grant opportunities to bring passenger rail require a match. And so we like communities that are willing to take a tough vote and put their budget behind the project. And then I'd say the third key success for us is the NCDOT's expertise. Applying for and administering federal funds is an incredibly complex thing to do. And small and mid-sized towns do not have the staff to be able to do that. And so I think what we are most proud of is the partnership that we have created with these communities where we bring that expertise, we ensure they stay between the guardrails, but they decide what that investment looks like in their community.
Thanks. Mr. Gardner, with apologies for the pun, to keep this engine running for Amtrak as well as for state-supported systems, can you help us understand how the FRA's corridor ID grants are meshing with Amtrak's investments, both state-supported as well as Amtrak directly?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member Larson. The Corridor ID program by FRA is really the pipeline of development for expansion. The type of expansion that Deputy Secretary White mentioned is happening and planned to happen in North Carolina that our chairman just mentioned. It's really the pathway, similar to the FTA Capital Investment Grant Program or New Starts, that establishes with the guidance of the federal government the development of this network. And Amtrak's role in that is to be a partner to FRA and a partner to states like North Carolina who are looking at options and ideas and opportunities for passenger rail. And I think, I take your point, Chairman Nels, that we need to, of course, take care of the network we have, but we're responding to the overwhelming interest across America to see more passenger trains in different communities. And so we're trying to support that while also driving our business and improving in all the dimensions that we can. I think our investments are really in two common and sort of two buckets. One is this IIJ supplemental funds that's really letting us bring all of our old assets sort of out of the 20th century and drag them into the 21st. And then this annual appropriations that you mentioned is so key to keeping our current services going and allowing us to partner with states for modernization, because the IIJ funds that come to Amtrak aren't for expansion, they aren't to grow capacity, they're really to rebuild that old sort of core asset base. So we need those annual funds, and we need the funds that the FRA is providing to our state partners and others to keep developing this network and look for the opportunities, recognizing that some opportunities are nearer and some are in the distance, but passenger rail can play a much bigger role in mobility in the United States, and we think it must.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Rouser for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Ms. White, I'm going to start with you. Thank you so much for being here and appreciate the work that you do for North Carolina. So in your role, you oversee the rail division as well as the aviation and ferry divisions. And I want to take the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the ferry system, which is the second largest in the country. Are there things that Congress can do in terms of reforms to federal programs such as the rural ferry program that would be a benefit?
Thank you, Congressman, so much for the question. I love talking about ferries at the Railroad Subcommittee. We do run...
I am chairman of Water Resources, so I have a little leeway here.
We do run our own transit system. We do run in North Carolina a ferry system serving eastern North Carolina. It is a $74 million a year operation with 23 vessels and 8 routes, including a seasonal one. And so we are incredibly proud of running that system. And thank you for the support that Congress did in creating the Rural Ferry Capital Program. It's a $20 million a year competitive grant program. We are very grateful to be able to compete for that fund. It is incredibly oversubscribed. To build a vessel costs us, depending on the type of vessel, anywhere from $30 to $50 million. So competing in a $20 million pot is incredibly difficult. So we would very much appreciate consideration of additional resources to the Rural Ferry Capital Program. Also, there are some mileage requirements on what allows you to compete in the bigger pot of money that could be considered, maybe expanded to allow more ferry systems to compete within them. Thank you so much for the question.
And talk just a little bit about how that the ferry system is so critical during hurricanes and other natural disasters like we often have in North Carolina.
That is so true. Thinking back to Hurricane Dorian, the ferry division evacuated nearly 1,500 people and over 750 vehicles from Ocracoke Island during the Hurricane Dorian lead into the storm. And then after the storm, we were the first responders bringing over the necessary assistance to rebuild the dump trucks, hauling off the trash. We bring the gas, we bring the water. So it was a many months long effort of our team coordinating with Hyde County to do disaster response after Hurricane Dorian. We unfortunately are seeing more and more substantial weather at our coast. We now have on Highway 12 what we call sunny day storms. We will have complete water overwash on a sunny day on Highway 12. So we are very much a critical lifeline to the island, to our poorest county in the state, which needs to pull in its tax revenues in the summer to support the county year-long.
Thank you much. Mr. Gardner, now back to rail. And I don't mean this as an antagonistic question whatsoever, so don't take it that way, but has Amtrak ever turned a profit in a year?
No, sir.
I think that's why the issue of bonuses and incentive pay is so touchy. And particularly given the dollar amount. So what's the prospects, what's the timeline where you think we can get to a point where we can turn a profit?
Well, Congressman, I think first off, the sort of yardstick for measuring Amtrak and our performance is set forth in statute. And it's really a balance of both financial performance and efficiency and
I got
public
that.
service.
I got that.
So we're trying to do both those things. Before the pandemic, we were essentially about to be at break even. We lost all our business. We're working back to get there now. Our goal is in the next several years on the train operating side of the business, so sort of same stores to pre-pandemic. We would expect to break even towards the end of this decade, and we're working hard to achieve that. We are facing many significantly expanded costs. So while our revenues are back and above pre-pandemic levels, our cost structure is about 30 to 40% higher, depending on this area. So we're working hard there, but we're growing revenue. We're going to reduce losses this year. We'll keep reducing losses every year and work back towards getting as efficient as we can while driving as much value and service to the American people.
In my last 40 seconds here, you recently testified regarding Amtrak's desire to purchase and manage Union Station. You indicated your plan was to transform the station from the current mixed-use retail, restaurant, and transit hub to a sole-purpose passenger holding center. You know, one thing I'm a little concerned about here, we have a homeless issue there now. You take all those stores out, you take the mixed use out. Number one, where are we getting the funding to do all this? And are you concerned that it's just going to be a much greater magnet for the homeless?
Well,
It's a beautiful building.
absolutely, a beautiful building, Congressman, and we, our intention actually is to enhance and maintain the retail, but better amenities. As you know, right now, it's about half empty because of all the folks that have left during that period. Amtrak doesn't have possession of the building yet, but our goal is, in fact, to do what you just described, create a lively, mixed-use environment which supports all the transportation users. The big issue is that Amtrak was sort of sequestered in the back. We've more than doubled the ridership since we had this little leasehold in the back of the station. The main part of the building wasn't used for passenger transportation, even though we have MARC service and VRE service and WMATA. So we're just talking about using more of the building to serve the needs of the passengers while also creating a great community amenity and a place that millions of people come to visit every year from all over the United States when they come to visit this building and Washington. So we believe very much in a successful venture that will drive both commercial revenue so we can reinvest in the facility, and also the kind of amenities that people want in our train stations. So they want the bookstores, they want to be able to go to the cafe, they want a restaurant, and we want to serve the neighborhood well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
All right. Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to pick up where my colleague, Mr. Rouser, left off about Amtrak profitability. It's also how you opened your remarks, Mr. Chairman, about profitability. And I just want to ask, I mean, why, when we have hearings on highways, do we not open the hearings by saying, why are our interstate highways not profitable? Why have they cost the American taxpayer billions of dollars a year to maintain billions of dollars in broader costs to society, like the 40,000 Americans who die on our highways every year, and it's taxpayer dollars that clean up every one of those messes. It's taxpayer dollars that built the highways, hundreds of billions of dollars. Amtrak got none of that. Taxpayer dollars didn't build our railways. And yet, we don't have a problem with the fact that the interstate highway system doesn't make a profit. Or why not open hearings on airlines by saying, how much would our airlines make in profits if they had to pay for security, if they had to pay for air traffic control? They barely squeeze a profit as it is. In fact, the United States taxpayer has bailed out our airlines multiple times in the last 20 years to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars, and we don't ask them how they could be profitable if they didn't have subsidies. So there's a huge double standard here. And the fact that Mr. Gardner can even talk about approaching profitability, something that we wouldn't even discuss with our highways, is pretty remarkable, and it points to the innate efficiency of rail. Now, to emphasize my bipartisan credentials here, I also have a little critique of what the ranking member said, because when she brought up grade crossing accidents, we talked about how this is a problem for the railroads and this is a concern that railroads have. Ms. White talked about how the rail division is responsible for grade crossing accidents in North Carolina. Let's be clear, every one of these accidents is a highway traveler breaking the law, with very, 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 very few exceptions with malfunctioning equipment. This is lawbreakers getting killed by trains, delaying train passengers. I wish we could have a discussion about how we reduce the delays to rail passengers every time there's one of these accidents. That's what we should be talking about. And we should be talking about how we use highway funds to address accidents caused by highway travelers, not just pin this blame on the railroads. Now, Ms. White, I want to turn to you for a second to talk about your plans in North Carolina. You mentioned a goal of service from Wilmington to Asheville, a distance of 330 miles, currently a 5-hour and 45-minute drive. That's made possible, of course. It would be a much longer drive, but it's made possible by state and federal dollars that went into building those highways. What travel time would you expect for this corridor?
Thank you for the question. Each of those corridors has been admitted into the corridor ID program, so we're really...
I'm just asking a simple question. What travel time do you expect?
I don't have that answer at this
Okay,
point.
well, any other developed country in the world would do that in about 2 hours and 20 minutes, or under 2 hours for express service, because they would invest in true high-speed rail. I mean, Morocco is investing in true high-speed rail. Your much-touted S-line will go 110 miles per hour, the same speed as trains in the 1920s, and exactly half the speed of new lines in Europe, less than half the speed of new lines in China. Is North Carolina planning to build any new state or federal highways with a top speed of 35 miles per hour, half the speed of current highways?
We are not.
Okay. Are you planning to build any new international airports that only accept prop planes? The technology that was taking off in the 1920s when we had 110 mile per hour trains in America? I assume the answer is no.
We are not.
You said the trip from Washington, D.C. to Raleigh will be car competitive. I guess that's 4 hours, 30 minutes to 5 hours. Again, just to put this in perspective, any other developed country in the world would make that in an hour and 45 minutes, express trains in an hour and a half. That would be transformative. That would actually get a lot of people out of our airports and off our highways. That's what our goal should be. I mean, my point to you is that as you're building this, please look at what the rest of the world is doing. Look at the model of the TGV in France, where any new corridors they build are built to modern high-speed rail standards. Now, you have that opportunity because some of the S-line was abandoned, and so you're building a new corridor. The parts that are already existing, sometimes TGV trains slow down to go slower on those segments. But do not, please do not invest good taxpayer money into technology appropriate for the 1920s instead of the 2020s. Mr. Chairman, I believe that even you would be a great Amtrak passenger rail supporter if we invested in modern high-speed rail and not trains that we had 100 years ago. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Lamalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my home state of California, I'll direct this to Mr. Gardner, our high-speed rail project went from a projected ballot item that told the taxpayers it would be a $33 billion project to go from SF to LA and be completed by the year 2020. And a good portion of that, above the $9 billion bond portion that the voters voted on, the rest would be from private investments, attracting private investments. So far, the private investors have stayed away in droves. The $9 billion has been burned up, and the projected cost is, instead of $33 billion, is at least $128 billion. And there hasn't been a mile of actual track laid yet, other than some of the roadbed that has been put down and some of the bridges. They also at the time claimed that there'd be 1 million jobs up until, a couple of years after the ballot measure. Then they finally had to admit 1 million job years, which at the present number they tout of 13,000 workers, the math I did would say if you have 1 million job years divided by 13,000 workers, that'll take 76 years to build the project, which they're right on track for that at this point here. So this will be at least 2030 something before they get one of these segments done. So, Mr. Gardner, how could they be so far off on an initial business plan that they told the voters, the taxpayers, in 2008 to what we have now, where there's nowhere near 128 billion? They might be able to put their hands on 20 billion when they do carbon taxing, and they just filched another $3 billion out of the federal government here recently. So, when they're 100 billion short, where are they going to get that? And how could they be so far off on the plan? They didn't even have the route figured out before they put this in front of the voters.
Well, Congressman, certainly Amtrak's, as you know, not been involved in the high-speed project directly or its
we're
original
supportive in your
development.
comments.
We are supportive
rail.
of advancing high speed, and similar to Congressman Moulton's point, we think there is a real role for high speed in various markets in the United States, and California certainly has incredible markets and huge demand and real challenges in terms of mobility. But I think the main issue, and something we've learned, and an issue that's also faced Amtrak, is that quite often, because there hasn't been the apparatus to fund or develop early planning phases for good ideas, when folks are trying to sort of develop concepts for these systems, which I think could create a lot of value, they're doing so before we've gone through the standard preliminary engineering, design, NEPA processes that really do set the envelope of cost and schedule.
What did you just say for the last 40 seconds there? What did you just actually say right then?
So that one of the challenges when doing big projects is the amount of planning and the time for planning to get the project developed. And so what happened in California is really, I think the California high-speed team could explain the process, but I would say that for any project to really, a big project to be something that folks can understand in terms of estimating cost and time, you've got to go through this environmental process, and the environmental process and the planning process are really what set out the possible envelopes. So you asked me what happened from their initial estimates to now.
If you have an idea,
it's that process.
How a plan could be that far off, and we have bigger plans going forward. Let me talk about a more local one. Dunsmuir, California, up in my district, has used to have a twice-a-day connection there. During the pandemic, as they call it, was all halted. So now there's only one a day. You have to catch it around somewhere between 1 a.m. or 4 a.m., depending. So the local economy, and this is just one typical rural town, that rural areas are some of the least utilized service routes, and they have much more interruptions. So with Amtrak setting forward to do very optimistic work, how are we going to see that the rural areas are going to have any share of this that's going to be significant instead of being the tail end of the whole system?
Well, Congressman, we've got our Coast Starlight service is serving Dunsmuir and the other several stops in your district, and There is also supplemental bus service that serves some of the stations, Chico, and I think up to Reading as well. That's funded by the state of California in partnership with Amtrak, the connecting bus service. So I think maybe the change in service is the bus service levels, but we believe, as you heard from our chairman, in investing in this national network. Right now, the big changes that are happening are new fleet coming to better serve communities like Dunsmuir, and investments across all of the stations so that we have accessible stations and also stations that are
Thank you.
ready for.
I have to cut you off there due to time, but new fleet isn't going to change the fact that there's no trains running through there, and that we don't have the model be successful out there with passenger rail. It seems the freight has to somehow keep railroads in business. So with that, I'm way through time.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Now, I now recognize Ms. Foshee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Secretary White, as I'm sure you're aware, Siemens Mobility recently announced a new plant in Lexington, North Carolina, to manufacture and maintain train sets. From your perspective at NCDOT, what will the impact of this new facility be for our state? And how has the guaranteed passenger rail funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law influenced or leveraged business investment in our state?
Thank you for the question. So Siemens Mobility broke ground on their new plant in August of 2023. It'll be a $220 million facility in Lexington, North Carolina, that will create more than 500 jobs by 2028 and is estimated to grow the state's economy by $1.6 billion over the next 12 years. They sought to build a large-scale manufacturing facility on the East Coast because of all of the orders for new intercity passenger rail cars. We are very excited for the state of North Carolina to see the supply chain that will grow around that investment, bringing even further jobs and opportunity to North Carolina. And we're excited to see those trains roll out of North Carolina-made plant up and down the eastern seaboard, including when our new trains arrive in North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, North Carolina received 7 Corridor ID grant awards last year. How do you anticipate this funding improving North Carolina's ability to invest in and accelerate the development of passenger rail in our state?
So Corridor ID is really important because a community needs, as Stephen had said, the community needs to understand what is a project going to cost. The Corridor ID first step initially unlocks $500,000 worth of planning funds so that we can start to work with communities to define what the service outcomes are that they would like to see and what the infrastructure investments will be that are needed to make that happen. So with each of our communities that have been admitted into the Corridor ID program, we're now meeting with them to understand what is the kind of service outcomes that they would like to see, what is the match that they will need at what time in this process. I would give as an example when we were meeting with the community of Fayetteville recently. They are very excited to have their corridor admitted into the program. They see a connection between Fayetteville and Raleigh as really important to their military community. They don't get direct flights out of Fayetteville to DC, which is a common path of travel. They lost their direct flight some years ago. And so they see this as an opportunity to do a ticket on a train from Fayetteville to Raleigh, and then they can go from RDU to DC as a solution for them. When we build out the S-Line, they're more excited that they can stay on that single-seat train and go from Fayetteville right to DC. But what we're doing with them is saying, we'll do this first phase of initial planning with you, and then we can tell you when you'll need your 10% match for the next phase of planning and how much that will be, so they can put it into their local government budget cycle. And then we can say when you get to the construction stage, that'll be 80% federal funds and 20% non-federal funds, and this is how much that will be and when you will need it. It's that kind of structured planning that will tell a community what has to be built, how much it will cost, and what the timetable is to when they will need that funding. So we're doing that with the Wilmingtons, the Asheville's, the Goldsboroughs, the Fayettevilles, all across our state. And that kind of robust planning, I think, will help us be able to deliver more projects on time and on budget. I will have to brag a little bit on our rail division in North Carolina. During the earlier era investments, the state of North Carolina won a $500 million investment to improve the corridor between Greensboro and Charlotte. It was a $500 million investment, and we delivered it on time and on budget. We delivered it $3 under the grant that was given to us. We attempted to spend the last $3, but could not find a way to do that within the rules. So we feel really confident that when we take these corridors through Corridor ID, we'll be able to help deliver those projects.
Thank you. And finally, can you speak a little about the ways in which North Carolina's Department of Transportation works both with Amtrak and local communities to ensure that train service will benefit our communities back home?
It's really important for us to listen to the communities and understand the service outcomes that they need. We're starting to explore a 6th frequency between Charlotte and Raleigh, and so our first step will be to go to the communities along our main corridor between Raleigh and Charlotte and understand how do they use our train? How would they like to use our train? We have folks who commute between cities for their jobs. We have folks who use it to get to health care. We have folks that use it to get to college. Our main corridor touches about 22 colleges. So understanding what times of day they travel and how they want to use it will be a first step in ensuring that it meets their traveling needs. And then we'll work with our freight railroad partners, with the North Carolina Railroad, and with Amtrak to figure out what kind of infrastructure investments are needed to create that kind of capacity to unlock that additional frequency along the corridor. So for us, it's really about the partnership with our partners. In North Carolina, we approach rail projects because we run on freight rail tracks. We approach it as how do we create a win-win? How do we create the ability for freight to not only continue to run its freight, but to grow its freight opportunity, because manufacturing is a key part of our economy in North Carolina, while also building the additional capacity to add more passenger rail. So we really take, I think, a partnership approach to what we do.
Thanks for that, Mr. Chairman. That's my time. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Babin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for being here today. My questions are for you, Mr. Gardner. California just petitioned the EPA to allow it to implement the so-called in-use locomotive regulation, which would effectively require all locomotives, including passenger rail, to operate in a zero-emission configuration when operating in the state of California. Does Amtrak have a position on this matter? And if so, why did Amtrak choose not to submit comments?
Thank you, Congressman. My understanding is that the proposal won't create an issue for Amtrak and our current fleet and our trajectory over time to achieve net zero by 2045. So we're working with the state, and we support ultimately the transition here where it's appropriate. And so we've been working with California. Of course, obviously maintaining service and is going to be critical to us, but that's our position so far.
Well, all other railroads, large and small, have conducted extensive analysis to determine the impact of this regulation on their businesses and on their customers. What sort of analysis has Amtrak performed at all, if any at all, and what are the results of Amtrak's analysis? And if EPA approves the California regulation, it may well be implemented in other states as well. So what sort of impact would this regulation have on Amtrak's business?
Yep. Again, I think at the moment we don't anticipate there being a significant impact to our service in California, but I can follow up with you with any of the specifics based on our analysis.
Great. Amtrak recently projected a $1 billion in annual losses through 2027, and some of it's already been discussed. Much of this has been related to COVID-era impacts, but as we all know, COVID hysteria has been over for a while now. For Amtrak, ridership has nearly recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So why is Amtrak still going to lose so much money over the next few years? And how is COVID actually still impacting Amtrak's business model?
Thank you, Congressman. So last year, we've significantly reduced our losses year over year. Last year, our loss was $752 million, which was $120 million better than the prior year. This year will be somewhere around $670 million. So we're continually to improve, and as I mentioned to the chairman, get better and better financials here every year. The big issue that's facing Amtrak in terms of cost structure, because you mentioned our revenue is back, our ridership is back. What's significantly higher is our costs, and those have come in really a couple of different forms. First, our labor costs are significantly up. As you know, the freight railroads started the pattern bargain with their unions, and we've followed through. We're almost done with our agreements. We have really great relationships with our unions, and I think we've got really good deals, but these costs are going up, and they reflect the larger wage sort of increases across the economy. For us to be competitive, we've got to pay competitive wages. So those labor costs are up, fuel costs are up, insurance is significantly higher, claims-related expense also up significantly. So a lot of headwinds. That's all before you get to the supply chain. So all the costs, of course, associated with the hard materials we purchase have all increased. So we're fighting that inflation, but we are clawing back sort of year by year here with better revenue and more service against the strong demand.
Well, Amtrak claims to be a private company, but a private company that anyone that I know of could not keep its head above water when it's bleeding billions of dollars of that nature. And I don't think, would a private company likely consider handing out bonuses ranging from $500,000 to $750,000 if their company were performing like that? And I think not. So, Mr. Gardner, how do you justify handing out so much money to your executives if they are failing to get Amtrak into the green, or the black, I should say? Does performance have anything to do with bonus decisions, or are the numbers decided on arbitrarily? And if there is some sort of calculation or metric that determines these bonuses, I'd appreciate you sharing that with the committee today, because we're very interested, or at least following up with my office to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to share that with you. And as the chairman said, we'll be publishing this information. We do provide these numbers to Congress, and we've been able to talk through the way it works. I think to go to your first point, Amtrak is a federally owned corporation chartered here in the D.C. under the Corporate Act. So certainly we don't consider ourselves a purely private corporation. We obviously are owned by the government and responsive to the taxpayer, and we have a board that's appointed by the president. So we have a dual mission, really, to both serve the nation and to do so efficiently and be good stewards of the public's resources and try and generate as much as we can to cover this network from the users of the system. And so we work hard to do that, and we'll continue to work hard to do that. In terms of the network itself, it's set really by Congress. So to the extent that the network produces some services that require subsidy, like transit all over the United States, then that's because Congress has asked us to run those services, and we believe that they produce value. So we're supportive of that. In terms of the incentives, we have to compete with folks who have stock options, who get many times the value and incentives in the freight railroads and others, and we need to bring the best folks who can come manage a multi-billion-dollar program here in Amtrak in the United States. And so we are out there competing to try and get that value.
Thank you, sir. I now recognize Mr. DeLuzio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, folks. Glad to be here with you. I'll just note and associate myself with many of Mr. Moulton's good comments about this profitability question. I suspect we'd have a very different discussion here if we were talking about the massive subsidies that we provide for other forms of transportation that are not provided in a meaningful way to Amtrak and passenger rail, and the strong need for substantial federal investment, I think, in faster, high-speed rail. With that, I recently rode the Capital Limited from Pittsburgh down here to Washington. Beautiful ride. Takes you through really lovely parts of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland before you get to Washington. 7.5 hours or so. You do that by 4.5 hours by car. I think the scheduled flight time is a little more than an hour. It's less than that. I say that, again, recognizing that we need to have substantial investment in high-speed rail. Until that happens, which it should, this could also be faster. right? In 1941, my team found out it took about 6 hours, 40 minutes to do that trip. And we know the main problem, it's not just the topography, which causes some issues, freight traffic. Freight rail slows down a lot of what happens on that route and many others. The Host Railroad Report says freight train interference is among the top 2 largest reasons for delay for the 2 freight railroads who are there, Norfolk Southern and CSX. Passenger rail has legal preference over freight on the tracks, but DOJ, as I understand it, has sued a carrier one time, 1979. If I'm wrong, you'll correct me there. So, Mr. Gardner, my question, does Amtrak have the tools that you think are necessary to reduce freight train interference that causes delays on routes like the Capital Limited?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. And I mean, let me first start by saying that each route is different. There's always a combination of both the infrastructure and the geography and other things. We always are looking to have trip time competitive service. That's actually Congress's instructions to us and our mission, and one of the things that we're driving, because we are similarly frustrated that we can't connect Washington and Pittsburgh and other parts of Pennsylvania in a way that's competitive to auto. As you say, it used to be some of these routes were faster, and a lot of that comes from really 2 things. One is the change in the infrastructure configuration, so sometimes railroads that were once 2 tracks have now gone to 1, and there is less capacity, and it makes then trains meeting each other pose opportunities for delay. Now, the second issue is preference, as you mentioned, which is Amtrak and the passenger service getting the preference it's accorded. If the infrastructure has made smaller, then those kind of conflicts come up more often, and there's the opportunity for Amtrak to not get the preference it necessarily needs. Now, that's not always the case, but we do have an issue across the United States where Amtrak does not always receive the preference it's really that is entitled to under law, and we don't have an effective enforcement regime presently. So this is a major issue, and one in which we think more focus on will produce better results, and in a way that does not interfere with freight traffic, because frankly, you know, we have a train a day on this route, so it is a tiny impact.
And look, we have to move things via freight rail for a lot
Exactly.
of reasons. I agree. And I'll ask, with a little bit of time left, in terms of enforcement, you know, Congress has empowered the Surface Transportation Board when on-time performance drops below 80% to investigate why. The Capital Limited, also the Pennsylvanian coming out of Pittsburgh, are 2 routes where that's been the case. Why haven't we seen those kinds of investigations requested from Amtrak?
So we have started, we did start as soon as we had the authority to, because there was a long lead up to that point. We did initiate petition the STB to initiate an investigation, and that was on our Sunset route under Section 213 of PREA, and so that is underway. Certainly, we would like to see that investigation advance as as quickly as it can. The STB needs, I think, has the resources, needs to have the resources to do that. But we support this measure to determine what the root causes are for delays. There may be a variety of issues, infrastructure, maintenance, et cetera, but we have poor performance on a number of routes, and we are responsible on behalf of American people and on your behalf to make sure we get to the bottom of what the root is and make sure that all the parties who are responsible are working together to get better service for American people and the taxpayers.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I recognize Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we operate with rose-colored glasses on. Now, I understand that passenger rail is well-liked by some and well-used in certain geographic areas of our country. However, no 2 states are exactly alike, and practicality must be applied judiciously when considering future investments. Spending billions of dollars should have certain qualifiers like efficiency and cost effectiveness. I'd like to read an excerpt from an op-ed piece in the Duluth, Minnesota News Tribune from April 2021. This comes from John Phelan, an economist at the Center of the American Experiment, when reflecting if a proposed train from Duluth, Minnesota to Minneapolis, Minnesota would be quicker than driving. Mr. Phelan stated, quote, "No, the train will take 150 minutes. At present, you can drive from the depot in Duluth to Target Field where the Minnesota Twins play in 140 minutes. And that assumes you want to go directly from the depot to Target Field. If you want to go from, say, Hermantown to the Mall of America, Hermantown is a city right next to Duluth, you have to add travel time on either end of the train. There's an 18-minute drive from Hermantown to the depot and a 46-minute light rail ride to the Mall of America for a total journey time of 214 minutes. The drive, on the other hand, is 143 minutes, 71 minutes of savings. And all of this doesn't account for the waiting time on train timetables. When any mode of transportation fails to reduce costs, time, or ease for our constituents, and when true feasibility isn't clear, we should really consider if this is the wisest way to spend taxpayer dollars. I want to just ask a couple of quick questions. Mr. Gardner, you responded to one of Mr. Babin's questions. And in part, you responded by Amtrak is owned by the government, paid for by the taxpayers. Did you say that?
Yes, sir, along with the revenues we receive.
And Amtrak, you believe that transparency is important when you're making decisions, and allow the public to be not a part of the decision, rather, but to understand your decision-making? And I'm getting at, in your meetings, would you ever propose to make your board meetings public, transcripts, make those transcripts public?
So, Congressman, I think Chairman mentioned today our response to first fulfilling all the requirements of the new IIJA rules for the board and having more engagement and more transparency. And I think the board's willingness to further engage and create more transparency and visibility, because I think obviously we're excited by the engagement of folks who want to be a part of Amtrak and understand what we're doing and create more opportunities to do that while also making sure the company can undertake its business.
So with that being said, you stand by your comment that Amtrak is owned by the government and paid for by the taxpayers. What is your salary per year?
It's roughly $499,000 a year, sir.
500,000?
Yes.
$500,000?
Yes.
What was your bonus last year?
Between our long-term program and our short-term program, about $620,000.
You made about $1.1 million last year?
Correct.
Mr. Crosher, do you want to answer those questions?
Thank you. Yes. And I'm very sensitive to the concerns that you and others have expressed here. Let me just sort of answer your question in part by saying that I kind of approach this from the perspective of someone who's been on the Amtrak board, as I mentioned, since 2010. So I have actually seen the transformation of Amtrak that has accompanied a pretty significant change in the leadership at Amtrak within the management of the company. Amtrak is an operating entity. It runs a business that is to some degree prescribed by the Congress.
Mr. Crosher, I have 10 seconds left. What was your salary? What is your salary per year?
My salary? I'm unpaid. The board is paid board fees for the days that we.
What did you make last year?
$18,000?
Any bonuses?
No.
You're not on salary?
No.
Okay. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My district in Southeast Louisiana has historically been a leader in transportation. Famously, the city of New Orleans once had a large network of streetcars and was one of the first American cities to use electric trolleys. Today, we're home to the Port of South Louisiana, one of the nation's leaders in total tonnage, as well as the Port of New Orleans, the only deep-water port served by 6 Class 1 railroads. However, Louisiana has fallen behind other areas of the nation in terms of passenger rail options. Transportation leaders in Louisiana like John Spain and Southern Rail Commission are now planning to further connect the state by commuter rail, including lines connecting New Orleans west to Baton Rouge, and east to Mobile, Alabama, with stops at the communities between those cities. Doing so will reduce our transportation emissions, increase travel choices, create good-paying jobs, and add additional evacuation options in the face of stronger and faster hurricanes. I'm also proud to say that the development of these routes both have been benefited from the massive investments in the rail infrastructure made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Question for Mr. Gardner and Ms. Koshia. Mr. Koshia. Last year, Amtrak announced an agreement to restore Gulf Coast service between New Orleans and Mobile, which has been out of service since Hurricane Katrina damaged the lines in 2005. That project was aided by roughly $178 million awarded through funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which helped make this return to service a reality. Amtrak and Southern Rail Commission have said that service would restart by the end of this year. Is this still a realistic time frame? What is the status of negotiations of the City of Mobile and their station improvements?
Thank you, Congressman. And as you know, we're very big supporters of returning service to the Gulf Coast, and it's been a multi-year effort, a lot of work over the years, and a strong partnership with the Southern Rail Commission. And we are hopefully very soon concluding our work with the City of Mobile. They need to work with us on a property agreement to allow us to undertake allow station work, CSX to undertake station work there in Mobile, and then support their contribution to the grant funds. So we're trying to finalize that with them, working hard, and we believe they're also working with other folks in Alabama.
Is the end of the year still a realistic
I think we'll have to see if this work can be concluded here in the next month or so in terms of these agreements. That's what really allows CSX to then undertake the capital work necessary. Certainly from Amtrak's perspective, we're ready. We have trains, crews, we're ready to go, but we need the work to advance, and we'll be doing everything we can to get the service started as soon as possible. So I'll be able to update you soon here, and I'll be happy to come to your office to do that.
Needless to say, it's incredibly important to the people of our region, economically, environmentally, in every way you can possibly imagine. We missed the boat, as you may recall, years ago when then Governor Jindal opted to not take the resources to create this advancement. Fortunately, we are moving forward now, and we're prepared to help in any way we can. Mr. Koshia, do you have anything to add to that, sir?
No, other than to indicate that the board has followed this particular expansion very closely, and we are sort of very, hopeful that it'll be initiated.
How would you describe your experience in working with the freight railroads to restart service between New Orleans and Mobile?
Well, at this point, it's been very good. For a long time, there was debate between us about this, but when we've come to agreement, and the FRA, who's been an amazing partner, and the Department of Transportation has invested and spent a lot of time helping to bring the parties together here. They've been doing important work. There's really two big infrastructure components. There's positive train control installation by Norfolk Southern in Louisiana, and then this additional work needed in Mobile so that we have a station track. So those are the two predicate projects before service, and both partners are strong and working with us. So we need to just get these elements done with Mobile and be able to move forward.
About 18 seconds. The proposed New Orleans to Baton Rouge rail line will operate through an area some dub, and we're not proud of, an area referred to as Cancer Alley. Because of the amounts of petrochemical and industrial activity in that area. In terms of pollution reduction, can you speak to how the communities in these areas will benefit from the massive reduction in car trips near their homes due to passenger rail lines?
Well, Congressman, we're excited about Baton Rouge service, and that corridor is in the FRA Corridor ID program and is developing here. We are working with host railroad, CPKC, and we think that there'll be real appetite for this service and a major opportunity for folks to have an alternative to driving and, as you say, remove cars and the emissions associated with them in that corridor.
Any idea how to quantify the amount of reductions we'll enjoy?
That'll be part of the quarter ID planning process, so the.
$500,000 that was awarded.
That's right. Well, that's the
through
start, and that allows them to go into step 2, which is really the kind of service
Gentlemen,
development
time's
plan
expired,
phase.
and we got votes coming up here for a bit. I'm trying not to be, but
Thank
we
you.
want to try to
Time's
finish this
expired.
hearing before
Thank you.
votes here. I recognize Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gardner, a year ago, I asked you about Amtrak's proposed annual operating loss. You told me it would be over $800 million. What's the new projected annual operating loss?
About 670.
670. And last year, you also confirmed that according to Amtrak's 5-year plan for fiscal year 2022 and through 2027, that Amtrak expects to lose $1 billion every year. Has your expected loss increased due to inflation?
No, I think our, from 2020, our 5-year plan beginning 2022 anticipated higher losses than we in fact have experienced. We've been able to drive that number down last year and this year. So we're continuing to drive that number down below that.
To what point?
Well, again, our goal here is at the end of the decade to reach a sort of position of break even on the train operating side of the business, recognizing that there's a big portion of operating expense associated with the capital work. So we'll be able to help you see that. But our goal is to continue to make progress. We're setting our targets for next year here soon. So that will be something we work on with the board. But again, year-over-year improvement from last year, and we'll continue to make improvement next year in reducing the loss.
Okay. Your all's executives were paid between $500,000 and $780,000. On top of that, the executives received bonuses last year, at least $200,000. I don't blame you, I blame the board. I mean, it's the contract you signed up under, but I'm wondering, how do I explain folks in East Tennessee who are currently struggling, paying $600 more a month out of pocket just for living expenses through all this bad inflation, that executives of a company that isn't even profitable get annual bonuses worth more than some of their homes? Mr. Caution.
Yeah, I assume, Congressman, you're addressing that question to me.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
I was starting to respond to this in part to your colleague's question, which is to say that, as I mentioned, I've been on the board since 2010, and I can only answer that question within the context of having seen the before and after picture. I would say that Amtrak, for decades, probably 40 decades, suffered from both a chronic underinvestment in capital in a capital-intensive business and, frankly, weak management that allowed many practices to develop at the company that were not best practices. I've spent nearly 40 years in the private sector, much of it with very successful companies. I know what good looks like. It did not exist when we showed up. We intentionally revised the compensation program at the company because at the time the company had a very, very lucrative pension and post-retirement plan that would have cost us more than triple of what the incentive compensation plan had cost. We are pained, sir, at the amount of bonuses that we're paying at the incentive comp. We understand the anxiety that it creates here on the Hill and other places with a company like Amtrak that is serving this public purpose. But I also will tell you that an operating company that has to compete with employees, with the freight railroads, the airlines, the hospitality business, the engineering companies, all of whom pay their employees far more than we do, we have no chance of succeeding without bringing in a team and putting them on the field that have an ability to do it. This team brought Amtrak for the first time in its 50-year history to within $27 million in fiscal 19 to breaking even. That has never even come close. And in 2020, had the pandemic not occurred, we would have been in black ink on an operating level for the first time ever. Now, all of the headwinds that Mr. Gardner described to you that are creating a struggle for us to get back, we will get through them, and we will be back in black ink. And I will tell you that the board's objective for how quickly to get there is even quicker than I am assuming that is otherwise being considered.
I appreciate that. I'm going to run out of time, but the one thing that is crystal clear to me is that the American taxpayers are being forced to fund you all, and you have, for instance, you have a subpar dining experience, which ironically contributes to Amtrak's operating deficit, all while these executives make $200,000 bonuses. To me, that is unacceptable, and I yield the remainder of my time, Mr.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member and all of our witnesses. A part of my district, about half, is located just outside Chicago, and is deeply tied to the rail industry, as are many parts of Chicagoland. As the rail capital of the country and a growing economic hub, Chicago is a prime location for expanding intercity passenger rail. Mr. Gardner, the Chicago Hub Improvement Project, or CHIP, is a large project to improve the service and eliminate delays at and around Chicago Union Station for intercity connections throughout the Midwest. More than 30 million riders pass through the station annually, and there are 400 train movements each day. How is this project progressing, and has the Infrastructure and Jobs Act benefited this project?
Yes, thank you, Congressman, and we appreciate your support and focus on Chicago. It's, as you say, the epicenter of the nation's rail network, and it is the heart of Amtrak's national network. And the CHIP program really simply is about getting passenger favorable routes into Chicago Union Station, which is the heart of our national network for long-distance trains, and the Chicago Hub service, where we serve not only Illinois and downstate Illinois trains, but also Michigan, Wisconsin, now Minnesota, and other services. So really important. The program has been a recipient of funds under the IIJA and also most recently in the appropriations bill. We are focused right now on concourse expansion, which is really improving the outdated concourse that serves both our passengers and Metro passengers so that we can provide a much better level of service at the station. At the same time, we're looking to connect our routings out of the yard and terminal facility to be able to get those passenger-focused routes so we do not incur delays for both our trains to the east and the south.
Thank you. CHIP involves bringing together a wide array of stakeholders: Amtrak, Metro, Commuter Rail, and the Illinois, Chicago, and Michigan Departments of Transportation. How does Amtrak work with freight and commuter railroads to advance the CHIP improvements? And would having access to guaranteed funding similar to what highways have helped this project get finished?
Well, let me start with your last point first, which is that absolutely guaranteed funding is essential to undertake a program like this. This program is a multi-year, massive project that's going to involve many different stakeholders. We talk sometimes about some of the big projects in the Northeast Corridor, but this is even more complex because we have many railroads, we have many different elements of government, we have different states. We all need to come together and work as a team to accomplish this work. So having dedicated funding and support for both planning and execution is going to be absolutely critical. Otherwise, we simply will not be able to advance this kind of multi-year work. In terms of working together, we have a strong working relationship, obviously, with Illinois DOT, with our freight railroad partners, and with Metro at the core, along with the city, CTA, et cetera, where we are looking to find those win-win opportunities that both enhance today's service but create capacity for the future. Another really important piece here is building more capacity for future growth on the yard side, so we have more mechanical capacity, because as the states look to grow service, we need a place to park trains and service them well in Chicago.
Thank you. My last question: how is Amtrak prioritizing high-speed rail projects across the country, and what obstacles exist in terms of investment and infrastructure needs?
Well, it's a great question. So, as I said earlier, high-speed rail, we think, makes a lot of sense in certain markets in the United States. Not all markets, but certain markets would really have the density and the possible travel time that really support high speed as we see all over the world. So we're working to support those corridors that are in development. Several are funded through the Corridor ID program that FRA is leading. We've talked about the opportunities that we see in Texas, and we're evaluating those. And we see the great work that's happened in the St. Louis corridor of providing service up to 110. Now, that certainly isn't the high speed that we all could envision and hope for, but it makes a material difference because it creates that trip time, competitive, reliable service. So we're focused on both those near-term opportunities. One of the best is the S-Line that we're working on with our colleague here in North Carolina. The opportunity to take that corridor and create a dedicated 110 or 125 mile an hour corridor that can relieve congestion on the rail side and create a faster trip is hugely important. The core of this, though, is that we don't have
Mr.
money
Gardner.
for high-speed rail.
The gentleman's time is
We
expired.
need funding for that.
Thank you. Mr. Yakim, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Earlier this year, the committee held a hearing focusing on the role commuter rail lines play in our communities. I was pleased that the South Shore Line, which operates in my district, was able to participate and share some of the benefits of commuter rail in north central Indiana. Additionally, the South Shore shared some of the challenges they face. Just last month, after a decade of planning, financing, and construction, the South Shore opened its $650 million double-track service. It was an incredible accomplishment that will greatly benefit the Hoosiers that I represent. My question, Mr. Gardner, it's good to see you again, by the way. We've spoken a few times on prior occasions, both in my office as well as in this committee. As we have discussed, the double-track capital project was not funded by Amtrak in any way, yet, of course, Amtrak is essentially inviting itself onto the double-track. Can you reaffirm your commitment that if Amtrak invokes this authority, you will work with the South Shore on the timing of those routes and compensate them appropriately?
Well, thank you for the question. Good to see you again. And so first, I did have a chance to congratulate my colleague there at ICTY on the launch of service, and we're very excited for the work they've accomplished. As I said before, Amtrak is right now just in the process of evaluating different options. We're doing this together with the FRA and the states to look at ways that we can, it's called the South of the Lake Challenge, of providing service from the east to Chicago and looking at the different opportunities there long term. So we're still in the planning phase. I did commit, and I will continue to commit, that we would of course work with our partners there at the South Shore about any possible use of the infrastructure. Amtrak does have rights to use the infrastructure, but we would do so pursuant to the federal rules and only as a result of cooperation and partnership. So a big choice here also will be the role of the state of Indiana and the other states and their interests in terms of investment. So this is still an early phase, and we will work with Mike and the team there at South Shore as we consider this and other options.
Great. Thank you for that continued commitment, and we will certainly hold you to that. Switching gears to another topic, Mr. Gardner, according to the most recent progress report on Amtrak's compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, Amtrak has addressed its ADA responsibility in 119 of the 385 stations. I know there's bipartisan frustration with Amtrak's lackluster compliance with the ADA, which was signed into law in 1990. My question is, Amtrak will get $22 billion in funding from the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or IJA. How much of that money will go toward complying with the ADA?
Great question, and of course we share that frustration, and I think over my tenure at the company, we've really done a lot to change that trajectory, investing over $800 million in ADA improvements. Right now, we have about 190 stations that are compliant either entirely or all the way except the platform, and that's another component. We have about 140, almost 150 stations in design. All the design will be done the end of next year. We've got another roughly 70 stations in construction in some form occurring this year. So we're making great progress. About $1 billion, a little more than $1 billion of that $22 billion is dedicated to these ADA improvements.
Great,
so we're on track and working with FRA on that.
And I know that Amtrak is looking to use some of the $22 billion from IJA to expand into potentially new service stations. Will you commit that Amtrak will not inaugurate any new service stations on routes with stations that are not ADA compliant?
So typically the FRA, when we go to start a new station, a requirement is that it's ADA compliant before we do that. Now, we do have instances where we have temporary stations that are before a final station is complete, but we always make sure it's accessible. So, but we are required to have compliant stations.
Right. Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Gardner, Mr. Kosha. It's always great to see you and to be able to partner with you on these incredibly important projects. The Gateway Program is one of the largest and most urgent infrastructure projects in the country and will improve reliability and resiliency for some of the most heavily trafficked miles of railroad in the country. And our district is home to the bulk of this project in New Jersey. Just this week, the Federal Transit Administration announced a full funding grant agreement for the Hudson Tunnel project, which will build a new 2-track Hudson River rail tunnel to connect New Jersey to Manhattan. This agreement is a historic milestone for this project and is the next step towards finalizing the largest ever mass transit grant in U.S. history. This is incredible news for our district and will not only make significant strides in improving rail service, but will bring tens of thousands of jobs to our region. It is a privilege to sit on this committee and work with my colleagues on the committee and in our district to see this project to completion. Mr. Gardner, can you expand upon how the IIJA has resulted in more reliable service for those who use intercity passenger rail on a regular basis?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and we're overjoyed at the investments that are coming here to propel the Gateway program forward. And as you say, it is an incredible program. It's really to take the biggest bottleneck on the North American system, really, the two-track main line between Newark and New York, which is the busiest main line in North America, and create a four-track crossing that's reliable and that can serve for decades, hopefully centuries ahead, really. So we're really excited about that work. In addition to that project, there are a number of others in the region. There's the Portal North Bridge program, which is already underway, funded before IIJA. We've got the Sawtooth program, Dock Bridge, and a whole series of improvements that are being propelled because of the bipartisan infrastructure law investments. So it's really been decades in the making, these deferred investments, many we inherited when we took over the corridor in 1976, and this is the first time we've had the dollars available to make these improvements, and in partnership with the states, because these are not just Amtrak and federal investments. The states have, as our colleague here has said from North Carolina, we look for skin in the game participants here who can invest as well. So in addition to those huge projects, we're spending a lot of money trying to rebuild the railroad today so we get more reliability. The same issue for the tunnels exists at the track level. Switches, signals, overhead catenary. These systems are, in some cases, from the 1930s. So we've got to rebuild them, and we're out there doing that and trying to balance that with service because it's hard to rebuild the railroad while you're running trains. So we've got to find that right mix and be able to get more and more investment out in the railroad and have that show up as better, more reliable service for passengers.
Absolutely, and just want to quickly, because I want to be respectful of the other members, just give you an opportunity to follow up on this, because we know about the incidents the last couple of weeks on the Northeast Corridor, et cetera. You allude to this in your prior answer, but just want you to be able to speak directly to the commuters, the residents of the district, and how does the IIJ funding towards the Northeast Corridor, how will it minimize and eventually eliminate incidents like what we've seen the last couple of weeks with on the Northeast Corridor?
Yeah. Well, so thank you. The events of the last couple of weeks were a combination of some infrastructure failures and some equipment issues on New Jersey Transit side. Again, we share this railroad today and 24 trains an hour. It's the busiest railroad service in the U.S. Here in this section. So on the infrastructure side, the big issues we had were some of our overhead wires. Again, this system that that supports the traction power for our trains is from the 1930s. We have fatigued, ancient, really designs and old equipment here, and it's made more difficult because there's very little windows to be able to go and do the work. So what the IIJA is allowing us in partnership with New Jersey Transit to do is go out and programmatically address those known critical areas of failure so that we can remove them. Meanwhile, these big projects are going to have huge improvements as well because they're going to put entirely new systems of power and signals in their locations, and things like Portal Bridge today, which sometimes opens and gets stuck. Those kind of delays, which can throw a commute period into total chaos, they will be gone or dramatically reduced. Now, it's going to take some time, but we apologize to those who have been impacted by this. Of course, it's the last thing we want to do is have unreliable service, and we're working hard, but we're digging out of a deep hole, and it's going to take a lot of money and time. Thankfully, Congress's support here has given us that pathway.
Absolutely, and I appreciate all the work, and know there's a lot more work to do. I yield back. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Mr. Keene, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I'll follow up. Ms. Gardner, Ms. Kosha, it's good to see you both here. The Northeast Corridor is the busiest rail line in the U.S. It's vital for over 51 million Americans, my constituents. It's extraordinarily important to their lives, livelihoods, and the economic growth and safety within the region. However, it struggles with aging infrastructure, leading to delays that we've just now recently discussed, and a $40 billion repair backlog. Building on the previous question, what's next when you're looking at the importance of commerce and movement? What are the urgent needs that remain that have not already been authorized that Amtrak is looking for?
Well, thank you so much for the question and for your support here. I know how important this railroad is to New Jersey and to mobility throughout the region. The big things that I think are remaining are really in three areas. One, we've only started this process of the catenary renewal and the signal system upgrade, and we need prolonged funding for that because already the big dollars in the IIJA have been dedicated to some of these massive projects. So there's more work to do. Now, these huge projects are going to deliver incredible benefits, but they don't resolve all the issues. So having funding that's going to take us into sort of the next tranche of investment is going to be really important coming out of this core investment. Additionally, we do need to work together with our partners to create more time to undertake the construction work because that is a challenge tonight. There'll be folks working out on the railroad, but they'll probably get less than an hour of uninterrupted time before trains come by and they have to pull back from the railroad and go to, and that kind of on again, off again work makes it inefficient to get the work done, and some work's impossible to complete without shutting down the railroad entirely for a period on the overnight. So those are really important components. I think the other element here is there is a need for additional capacity in targeted areas beyond the gateway section just to accommodate the growth we anticipate coming from New Jersey Transit and Amtrak over the long haul.
Thank you. I've got a question that I've asked you for a very long time, both on the state level and now here in this room. Amtrak to Connect U.S. proposes new corridor service for 16 states and expansion of service in 20 states at a cost of $75 billion. Similarly, Connect NEC to 2037 proposes more frequent service, connections to new markets, additional capacity, and reduced travel time on the Northeast Corridor over 15 years. The question here is still unresolved. Is more Acela stops at Trenton? Right now, there are none. Right, Metro Park, it's one a day, perhaps, facing and going in one direction. And if you're looking at future expansion, why are we not looking at doing a better job and more frequent access to New Jersey's state capital, to the economic and innovation entity that is around Metro Park, and we're looking at more consistent and predictable service for in the state of New Jersey?
So, Congressman, I know you're passionate about this, and we have, as you've said, we have changed some of the service levels around the various stations in New Jersey. In particular, we've seen an increase in service in New Brunswick and Princeton Junction and at EWR at the airport rail station. And we have seen some reduction, the Acela service in Trenton, as you mentioned, and a small reduction in Metro Park service. Now, we are, as I committed before, as we introduce the new Acela service and also our additional regional new trains, the Aero sets that start showing up in 2026, we will have more capacity and be able to look at all of the service patterns. Today, the demand has really shifted in these markets, but we will adopt a continual view at the demand here so we can get the service in the right markets, because we understand how important it is to have service at Trenton, and we do think that there is an opportunity for Acela there. Right now, given the limited frequencies we have, because in part we're waiting for more equipment, the priority has been on some of the other places that have produced more revenue and ridership.
If we are going to do what is necessary for the economic growth of New Jersey's capital city and one of the main innovation centers, both in and around Trenton, as well as in and around Metro Park, we need more consistent service and more predictability and more stops over the course of the entire day.
Got it.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for letting me join for this important hearing today. I represent Phoenix, Arizona, one of the fastest growing cities and communities in the country, and the largest metropolitan area in the United States without access to passenger rail service. Amtrak's Sunset Limited travels between New Orleans and Los Angeles, running through Tucson in southern Arizona. Adding service in the Phoenix area will open up the entire state to important economic opportunities to make our communities more accessible, more productive, and more internationally competitive. This past December, we took the first step towards reestablishing service at the federal level. The Arizona Department of Transportation was selected for the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor ID program and granted initial funding under our bipartisan infrastructure law to develop a scope, a schedule, and cost estimate. As you know, there's very strong local bipartisan support for reestablishing this connection. Mayors of a dozen Arizona communities along the proposed line have thrown their support behind the effort, including Phoenix, Mesa, Tempe, and Chandler, the communities that I represent in Congress. And the state of Arizona has put substantial dedicated resources, $3.5 million, towards this critically important planning effort. Arizona is sending a clear message to Washington and to Amtrak. We are serious and ready to move on with this project. Mr. Gardner, Phoenix to Tucson is just one corridor ID project of many across the country, nearly 70 across 44 states, as referenced by my colleague from New Jersey. While I know Amtrak may not engage with state DOT corridor ID projects until phase 2, the service development plan, what is Amtrak doing right now to plan for the next phase of this project?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And it is a great corridor, one we're really excited about. Phoenix is the largest city we don't serve directly here, and really it's a huge omission on our map and something we've long believed needed to be remedied. So we're really excited. I've had a chance to meet with the governor, had a chance to meet with Mayor Gallego and Mayor Romano, a number of mayors across the corridor. As you say, incredible bipartisan local support here and excitement about the opportunity to bring passenger rail into this corridor. So the corridor ID program, as you said, is really the process by which this will be developed. We are supporting Arizona, and we will be able to undertake some additional work with them as they go through this program. We've to date given a fair amount of attention and focus on the opportunities here, but the FRA program will really set the sort of pathway forward, but we continue to look for opportunities to partner with them, and phase 2 is really when we can undertake additional studies and work with them to drive things like revenue ridership and other opportunities. Similarly, we are leading the return to 7-day service on the Sunset route, and there's obviously overlap here, so this is an area which we're excited to advance, and we're gonna do that in partnership so that we can have an efficient planning process and get value from both projects together.
Well, once we get to phase 2, if Amtrak is selected, and my expectation they will be, you can't say that, but I can. We expect that Amtrak will be selected. I look forward to engaging closely with you. One of the reasons this issue is so important to me is because passenger rail will boost our regional economies with better access to jobs, more private investment along this route. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that in the little time I have left. Can you talk about how expanded rail service drives private investment?
Absolutely. We've seen incredible investments that have followed the type of service introduction that you're describing here. Whether it's in Maine, where the Downeaster service has established a whole transit-oriented development program and sort of revitalization of communities in New England, whether it is what we see being planned already in Colorado as they look to develop Front Range service, there's a huge amount of interest and density that gets developed, frankly, when we create this node of mobility with passenger rail. So we expect both immediate improvements to occur in the station area where folks locate both housing and commercial and office because they want that benefit of being able to connect efficiently to other markets. And then beyond that, we see benefits in housing and community and overall attractiveness in terms of competitiveness for communities that have this kind of service. And particularly amongst the younger generation. I know Congressman mentioned that folks are looking for trip time competitive service. We completely agree, but I would note that there are many folks who would rather take the train than drive, even if it's a little bit longer. Now we got to be in sort of the ballpark, but frankly, people find the train more productive and more relaxing than driving in many places, particularly younger generations, and that's important for communities.
Thanks so much. Mr. Chairman, so we don't miss votes.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Yes, the gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from members of the committee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, this concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each one of you for being here. The committee stands adjourned.